A former coworker of mine over at 247Sports said that Michigan is capable of winning a national championship if one particular thing goes right. Happens to be the same type of thing that we have been talking about for the last month. So we're going to get a little bit more into that, discuss a bit of that, while I give you my essentially too deep for Michigan as it stands right now. It's probably wholly inaccurate, but we'll do the best we can. We're going to do that on this episode of Locked On Wolverines.
You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Tuesday. We're back and doing it. I wanted to say Wednesday like I did last week. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I'm your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. And Clint Brewster, who we had a little tiny bit of overlap at Wolverine 24/7 back when that existed, because it was, for a minute, me, Steve, and Clint. I kind of took over Clint's role as the beat writer. He was operating out of Nashville, but he has since moved over to being an analyst and prospect evaluator, kind of more his speed, right, as a former quarterback, to be able to kind of analyze players and teams and such and what they need and what they don't. And Clint Brewster comes onto Twitter and drops a bomb. Of course, a bunch of people love it, and a bunch of people hate it. And a bunch of the people with the laughing emojis are the same ones that were saying the same thing about Jesse Minter. LOL Vanderbilt. 2 years later, cheating. You know. Clint Brewster says if Michigan is able to create consistency in the passing game with Alex Orty this year, I think they will win it all again. He's not alone. We're going to look again just to see if there's anyone else here other than who I saw yesterday. Bud Elliott from the Cover 3 podcast, also 247 Sports and CBS Sports. He says 100,000% agree. So everyone else is mostly, go Bucks. They're more likely to lose the opener than they're going to be able to win it all in the next 5 years. Go Bucks. It's, I actually mostly agree, and that's because, obviously, everything that the team has. Certainly, depth does play a factor. So even though we talked about depth the last couple days, there are some areas of concern depth-wise at certain positions. Defensively, no. Defensively, I kind of had everything penciled in. I was able to figure out my two deep with very few ors. But some of the ors that was a good situation. It was or because those guys will rotate in, certainly. And then there's certainly, when I look at, I have a list of unmentioned standouts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the 8 that I list are defensive. So there's a lot of different guys that I think that can stand up defensively. Offensively, depth-wise is where it's an issue. Offensive line is where it's an issue. But it will be a little bit less of an issue, I think, when some of these position groups figure themselves out. So I came up with a 2-deep depth chart. We're going to start getting into it right now. Just go right into it. We'll do the defense first because that, I think, requires less exposition. So my edge rushers are Josiah Stewart and Derek Moore, obviously. I mean, all the starters, none of them are a secret, right? The backups are TJ Guy and Cameron Brandt is who I have as the primary. Certainly there could be an or with the Cameron Brandt, but I'll keep it with just him for the moment. Defensive tackles are obviously Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. Your backups there are Rayshawn Benny, Eno Etta, or Trey Pierce. Your linebackers are Jayshon Barham and Ernest Hausman. Your backups are Jaden Hood and Jimmy Rolder. Your nickelback is Zeke Berry with Jaden McBurrows backing him up. Your cornerbacks are Will Johnson, Jair Hill, and the backups are Amir Hall, Keyshawn Harris, or Ricky Johnson. Your safeties are Makari Page and Quentin Johnson. Your backups are Jaden Mangum, Wesley Walker, or Brandon Hillman. And certainly some of those could bloom. But none of that, like when I go through the starting lineup there, like I think that's it. it's the backups. And I think that all of those guys I mentioned as backups 100% will be in the rotation. I think the question more so is who else ends up joining that rotation? So we get to my unmentioned standouts for the year. Let's look at the defensive guys, so the 5 guys there. I have a couple freshmen in the group in Dominic Nichols, who I think absolutely will be in rotation. That's not unheard of at the edge rushing position. It always does seem like there is a freshman edge rusher who does kind of burst on the scene. I would not be surprised if Lugar Dedekpai ends up being on that as well. Or even Devin Baxter. I think that they had a really nice haul. Might be unheralded compared to the guys that in the last couple of years that they were supposed to get. Guys that transferred out, Jaden Smith, or who's the guy from Ohio, went to Florida, went back to Ohio. I can't remember. There's, the year before, Collins Achiampong, rather. So there's certainly been a lot of edge rushers that have been left on the table, but I still think they had a nice haul. Ike Ibotta is a guy who's been mentioned quite often. He's an interior guy. He's been mentioned in spring. He's been mentioned in fall camp. I think that there's certainly a road for him. You have to remember Ike Ibotta. He was a 3-star out of Texas. He was a late 2021 class addition. He committed around the same time George Rooks did, and he's kind of languished, but it sounds like he's really kind of coming on. As far as the edge rushers are concerned, Breon Ishmael is another one. I don't know why I keep on forgetting to put him in that list. He looked amazing in the spring game. Maybe hasn't gotten as many mentions. We haven't talked to Lou Esposito this fall, but we haven't necessarily heard a lot of his name called, but I mean, he looked amazing in spring ball, so it'll be interesting to see if he ends up getting in there. And then Christian Boyvan, who certainly will be a special teams player. He had multiple plays last year. I think he could actually potentially crack the linebacker rotation, but there's others there. One of them is in my need to see it this year, although he's someone who is regularly mentioned, so it wouldn't surprise me. So when it comes to the need to see it this year, oddly, most of them are defensive. I've only got 3 offensive players, and again, there's 8 guys listed here and 5 on defense. But a lot of that has to do with just how deep that particular position group is. Miles Pollard, Cody Jones, obviously we talk about them all the time. Need to see those guys step up, right? Like it's time. It is absolutely time for those guys. Keyshawn Bennett is another one, right? He's a 4-star edge rusher. He looks like a premier edge rusher, and yet has not seemed to have done much yet. Micah Pollard, I think, is the most likely to break out of this. I think that he could absolutely be in that linebacker rotation. Here's a name. He was like a Mr. Football Illinois, I believe. Maybe I'm imagining that, but Tyler McLaurin, who was a linebacker, switched over to edge rusher. Like, I think that there were some big things, even though he's a 3-star, big things were expected of him, and they just kind of haven't come to fruition. So those are the guys defensively. So we're going to delve a little bit more into what Clint Brewster had to say as we go to the offensive side. I just wanted to tackle defense. It was a heck of a lot easier to go through the defense. Knew it was going to take a lot less time because it feels like, all right, pretty much set, right? Because you're looking and you're seeing, and I got starting 11 there, and then on top of that, I've got another, 11, 12, 13, 14 guys that are absolutely going to play. And then looking at the unmentioned standouts, I'd say you're going to see probably 3 of those 5. And then in the need to see it this year, you'll probably still see 1 or 2 of those guys in one way or another. So defensively, chock full of depth. You've got 2 defenses essentially there. But when it comes to the offense, I think that's where you've got a lot more question marks. A lot of the starters are set, but the guys who are behind them maybe aren't quite as much there. But we'll talk a little bit about the quarterback, and we'll talk a little bit about the rest of the offense here in just a moment. Before we do sandals, sunscreen, snacks for the kids, what do these things have in common? You're probably buying them a ton again this summer, but don't stress about the cost. Use Ibotta and get cash back on all of your purchases when you stock up on all of your late summer essentials. Ibotta is a free app that lets you earn cash back every time you shop, earn on hundreds of items from groceries to beauty supplies, even toys. You can even make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. The average Ibotta user earns $256 per year. That could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip, maybe even that flight you're eyeing or the fancy dinner that you've been craving. Other apps give you points that don't amount to much, but with Ibotta, you earn cash back that you can withdraw to your bank account, PayPal, or gift cards. Simply add offers in the app, upload your receipt, and voila, the money is yours. You can save on over 2,400 brands and shop at over 100, I was going to say 100,000, but it's 1,000 retailers, including your favorite grocery stores, Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora, Best Buy, and more. It's time you join the 50 million users who use Ibotta to earn cash back every time that they shop. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying Ibotta by using the code LOCKEDONCollege when they register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app to start earning cash back. Use the code LOCKEDONCollege. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store and use the code LOCKEDONCollege. All right, I know it might feel a little backwards that I led with that Clint Brewster tweet, and then I talk about the defense. But the defense is why. Why does he say if Alex Orji is a competent, essentially, passer, that he has Michigan as the pick to win it all? Well, it's because of the guys I just listed. That defense is as good as any team in the country, maybe better than every team in the country. Everyone loves to slurp Ohio State, but when it's kind of come down to it, it's faltered. Will it be better? It absolutely could be, but so could the Michigan defense, even having lost some of the guys. It all starts up front, right? I mean, that is an incredible lineup, the front seven in particular. I mean, the back four, back five, whatever you want to say, not too shabby either. A little bit of questions, but nonetheless, offensively, there's more questions. One of the places where I've seen a lot of Buckeye pushback, essentially, has been the offensive line for Michigan. I feel pretty good about this, whoever ends up being the starting five. It's a little less clear at this juncture who those will be. But just given that, Sharon Moore has been the offensive line coach since 2021. He's now the head coach. He's even vowed, we're always going to have a great offensive line that will smash up front as long as I'm the head coach here. I don't feel like, I understand some can say, well, Jim Harbaugh was a quarterback. He started off as a quarterback's coach with the Raiders or whatever he was, and quarterback assistant. And the quarterbacks haven't necessarily been world beaters per se, but that's just because the scheme he decided to run wasn't necessarily going to help that. Whereas the scheme that Sharon Moore is running is certainly offensive line centric. So I believe that. So let's go through the whole of the offense. We'll talk more about the offensive line and then the unmentioned standouts and the need to see it this year, all that stuff. Quarterback's wide open. I don't have here's a starter, here's a backup. And you see that more here on the offensive side. Alex Orji or Jack Tuttle or Davis Warren. I think that the caveat here is Alex Orji has to be the winner in order for Clint's prediction to come true, because he adds that extra element with his legs, assuming Michigan uses it, right? Because that's the other thing is, what did we see from J.J. McCarthy in 2021? Comes in and he runs a whole bunch. What did we not see once he became the starter? That. You saw it intermittently, but no more than any other pocket passer. And I think that, good thing Michigan won the national championship last year, because I feel like they were leaving a lot of potential offense on the table, and understandably, because you don't want to get your quarterback hurt. Obviously, he did get hurt in the Penn State game, and it certainly affected them the following week at Maryland. Certainly, Jim Harbaugh had to have, he lived through Shea Patterson tearing his oblique on week 1 in 2019, and suddenly a season that was potentially expected to be a college football playoff year, and Michigan was predicted to win the Big Ten. It all went down the drain literally within seconds of the season opener kicking off. So I think that does change things. So when you look at the offense, it starts with that quarterback, and I think Alex Orji does a lot. I went skill positions before I went line. So slot receiver, also kind of your wide receiver one, is Tyler Morris. I have CJ Charleston backing him up. Number 2, Samaj Morgan. I have Amarian Walker backing him up. Number 3, Frederick Moore, Kendrick Bell backing him up. All these things can kind of change because it depends on what kind of plays you want to run, right? Because you can absolutely mix and match with all those guys. But I think you're going to see the most Tyler and Samaj, Frederick Moore, CJ Charleston, Amorian Walker, Kendrick Bell, maybe Peyton O'Leary, maybe Channing Goodwin. I think that's kind of, you're going to see a lot of these other guys just kind of rotate in as the plays necessitate. Running back is obvious if you're looking at a 2 deep, Donovan Edwards or Kalel Mullings. Question is, who's that third back? I think we all kind of know at this point it's Benjamin Hall. Tight end, kind of same deal. You've got Colston Loveland and then Marlon Klein. Both will be on the field at the same time. So then it becomes who's those other guys. Max Bredeson's a starting fullback. He'll also be used in some tight end, so it's kind of him. It'll be those 3 guys. If you're looking at fullback in particular, Jalen Hoffman is the backup. We'll talk about another name here momentarily. And then we get into the offensive line. There's 2 places where I would say they're ors. Obviously, center is Greg Crippen or Raheem Anderson or Dom Judice. We haven't been talking about Dom Judice, but he gets mentioned almost every time that we talk about the offensive line in press conference scenarios. So I think that we're kind of underestimating what he does and what he's capable of. And it sounds like he's developed very nicely. I think that he might end up being kind of that 6th lineman if they decide to do some finagling. I think that's possible. I don't know if it's probable, but maybe they add from the interior rather than to the exterior. I don't know. They work out a lot of different things on the offensive line. And then the other place is right tackle. I have it as Andrew Gentry or Jeff Percy. Evan Link has come on strong. I had him as an or. I ended up making him the backup left tackle as for now. So the starters we know, Miles Hinton, Josh Preeb, Gio El-Hadi. So here's why it's not as deep is because I know that Miles Hinton, Josh Preeb, Giovanni El-Hadi are starters. I know that Greg Crippen, Raheem Anderson, Dom Judice, Andrew Gentry, or Jeff Percy are all starting caliber players. Behind them, I don't know. And that's a problem. Even at guard, I have Nathan Afobe and Connor Jones as being those interior guys. It feels wide open, and it feels like, yeah, you could probably move Evan Link inside, right? We've seen Michigan do that with some tackles and stuff. Certainly, you could end up being okay, Gio El-Hadi went down. You had Andrew Percy starting at right tackle. Let's move him inside, have Jeff Percy start, something like that. Because they cross-train on the offensive line, because most of these guys know at least 1 or 2 other positions on the line, if not all 5, that certainly gives them some leeway to kind of finesse things should any kind of cataclysm happen in season. But it's kind of just a big question mark to me as far as that's concerned. I feel good about where the wide receivers are, I think that's a position group that I've gotten a lot more confidence in recently. I feel great about tight ends. I feel great about running back. I feel great about a lot of aspects of the offensive line, but I feel a lot better about it by virtue of who's coaching that position and who the head coach is. I understand that Grant Newsome, we haven't seen him as an offensive line coach, that it's his native position. You hope it has the same type of effect as Sharon taking over for Ed Warner, right? It's hey, he's in his native position now. Let's see this thing climb. I do think that while you saw a lot of comments to Michigan's potential viability and saying that offensive line is going to be a lot worse than people think, I don't know that it will be, because it's kind of like it used to be. Michigan graduates certain guys and you're like, oh no, I don't know how that's going to work out. And then it works out great. So that's where that's at. Unmentioned standouts. Guys I think will stand out this year offensively. I have 3. Benjamin Hall, Jordan Marshall, and Deacon Tonielli, the tight end. I think that he's that guy. Zach Marshall got a mention from Steve Kazula on Sunday. So it wouldn't surprise me if he's in the same class. If he ends up seeing some time, I don't know that we'll see Hogan Hansen and Brady Prescorn, but they both are early enrolled. But we've seen that kind of the tight ends have just kind of had to genuinely wait. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how they work that out. But the running backs, I think that's obvious that those guys are going to play. Need to see it this year. 3 more guys on offense. I've got Tristan Bounds. buddy of mine. I really hope that he can find a way to kind of work that out and just, kind of crack the rotation a little bit more and be that guy that you hoped he could be. And then Tavier Dunlap, he's gotten some mention. I'll believe it when I see it. And then Peyton O'Leary. For Peyton, he's obviously looked the part in practice. He's looked the part in spring ball. But Peyton O'Leary hasn't exactly shown out in games. So that makes me question kind of where he's at. Walk on, so it's not like you need it. It's kind of weird to have a walk on and need to see it. But at the same time, there are very, very few walk-ons that have been as hyped as he has been. All right, let's get to special teams and then final thoughts on all of this. We'll do that here in just a moment. But before we do, you've heard us all talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we've got a little something different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube and YouTube TV. So with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Saturday afternoon at a market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. We are getting awfully close, and that means we kind of have a better idea of what this is going to be. That said, there's always some surprises. Don't know that it'll come on special teams. Starting punter, Tommy Doman. Kicker, Dominic Zavada. Long snapper, William Wagner. Kick return, punt return, I just threw out some names because whatever. Tyler Morris, Samaj Morgan. I know people don't love to see starting guys out there, but I mean, we've seen it, right? Jabril Peppers played literally all of these, and no one batted an eye. No one was like, oh, what if he gets injured? It's just kind of the post-Ronnie Bell of it all. Certainly there's other guys that could be on this list. Amarian Walker or, I don't know, there's a million guys that they've got speed. Fred Moore is another one, but it's just like they have to be able to catch it. They have to be able to move on and do all these different things. So not 100% sure. Wouldn't be surprised if it ends up being like a safety or a corner, could be like a Jaden McBurrows, could be like an Amir Hall, could be a Jaden Mangum. I don't know. There's all kinds of guys that they could work out into there. I'd love to see a Kenneth Grant return personally, but no, I'm just kidding. Backups, Hudson Hollenbeck at punter, Adam Samaha at kicker, Greg Tarr at long snapper. Poor Greg Tarr. He's just had to sit and wait. After he plays half a year, finally gets to in 2022, gets all that playing time. And then William Walker comes back for his 9th and then 12th season. Dude's never going to get it. Never going to get to play. He's been around since, I don't know. I just remember that when Greg Tarr committed, I remember writing that article from a cigar shop in Northville, and that feels like that was decades ago. That was 2019 when he committed. Been a minute, dude. All right, so that's that. Now that we've gotten through the depth chart, all the names, all of that. I have no special teams need to see it this year. Okay. So I probably could have done this in segment 1. We're gonna do it now. How much belief do I have in the Clint Brewster prediction? Well, we broke down the entire team because it gave you a little bit of an insight as to my confidence level at each position. It's still a little iffy on offense. But if you were to think about what the offense looked like in 2021, it was still pretty iffy. It was Cade McNamara, Roman Wilson, Cornelius Jones. Ronnie Bell got hurt in the first, he was the best player on offense, essentially. And he gets hurt in the first game. Then once you're past wide receiver, Blake Corum and Hassan Haskins, you get to fullback. I don't know who the fullback was at that point. And then the offensive line was essentially what it was last year, except for the center was Andrew Vastardis. Ryan Hayes was in there too. But certainly there were a lot of questions about the viability of that team in that moment. And when you look back, you're like, well, of course they did fine. But Michigan is a team that offensively, you have to keep in mind, that it does a lot of different pre-snap stuff. It does a lot of more complicated protection schemes and blocking schemes and different things of that nature compared to what a lot of other teams, right? It's a pro spread. It really is truly an emphasis on the word pro there. Now, they might do some things that are going to look more modern college football wise, but it has the elements that you would expect from the NFL. There's a reason why when Michigan players get to the NFL, especially on offense, that they're always lauded for their knowledge and ability to kind of just acclimate immediately. And it's because Michigan runs more complex schemes than a lot of other schools. Not all necessarily, but a lot more. And I expect that to continue. So it does all hinge really on that quarterback, because you have to be able to, protect the football. 2019 probably goes a bit differently without a lot of turnovers. Maybe some of those games go the same, but at least like the feeling that season would have been a lot better than turning the ball over 28 times in the first 2 games or whatever it ended up being. So I think that if the quarterback can take care of the football, if he has the threat with his legs, that opens up so many other opportunities. Now, they can still win if it isn't Alex Orji, but maybe it doesn't look as good once you start having to play against the Georgias of the world. Now, granted, they play against Texas, they play against USC, they play against Washington and Oregon and Ohio State. So it's not like they're without a heck of a lot of competition during the regular season. But I think having that added element that Orji presents, I think that gives Michigan the best chance to win if he is the best quarterback. So that's kind of where I feel about all of that. I think that as long as everyone else plays up to their level, it's going to be better than people think. Now, just because a lot of these guys aren't like super big names offensively, and weirdly, some of them are. Like Alex Orji might as well be a big name now because he's being mentioned in national college football, which wasn't really the case before, right? Especially as a recruit. Samaj Morgan's working his way into that, but you already have Donovan Edwards, Colston Loveland. You have a former 5-star. Recruiting doesn't matter, but still, as far as like the rankings, in Miles Hinton, Josh Preeb is certainly a high-level guy. Andrew Gentry and Gio El-Hadi, high-level guys. There are a lot of guys that maybe don't get spoken of as much. They might not be that flashy guy. You go down to Columbus and you're going to see all kinds of 5-stars. You're going to hear about Jeremiah Smith. You're going to talk about Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson and even Donovan Jackson and Josh Fryer and all these different guys. But what matters is how do they work within a team unit and how do they perform as a team unit and who's calling the plays and all of that kind of stuff. I think Michigan has had better execution, game plans, all of those things from a team perspective. Maybe not from an individual stat perspective, but from a team perspective, which is all that really counts when it comes to this. Like Michigan had the most players drafted that it's ever had. It had more than Ohio State, but man, like you would think it would have been a lot higher because people look way more at the individual accomplishment than they do how did they operate within a team perspective. And yet I feel like a lot of guys that were kind of late round draft picks are probably going to end up on NFL rosters. That tends to be how it works with Michigan guys. So as long as that part of the culture still exists, I think Michigan's in a really, really good spot. All right, tomorrow's Wednesday. That's almost news to me. We will continue on as we preview for Michigan a week and a half out from the 2024 season. So thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. We will talk to you again soon. Peace.